Okay, I was definitely not expecting the end of this chapter to be as interesting as it was. Needless to say, I'm super excited to get into today's chapter, so without any further ado, let's talk about JJK chapter 254. So if you guys remember at the end of JJK chapter 253, Sukuna hit Maki with a black flash, basically putting her out of commission entirely. And Kusakabe was basically the only one left to take on Ryomen Sukuna. Although he says that he would have simply run away if the odds were this low that he would lose, he was still determined to face off against the King of Curses, which I have a great deal of respect for. So the chapter kicks off with a fight between the supposed strongest grade 1 sorcerer and Sukuna. Let's see how this all hashes out, shall we? Kusakabe begins the fight by using new shadow style simple domain Evening Moon sword drawing. So as I'm sure you all know, Kusakabe is someone who can cast a simple domain and attack those who stand within it with incredibly quick sword attacks. And unfortunately, we didn't get to see what Evening Moon sword drawing was during Shibuya because Kusakabe was interrupted before he was able to fully utilize it. Kusakabe then monologues stating that simple domain can be used against domain expansions to eliminate sure hit effects, but it doesn't neutralize the curse technique itself. Although it may be simple, it's still a domain. Then as Sukuna sends slashes, Kusakabe brushes them off with his katana, thinking to himself that inside his simple domain his cursed energy output is amplified and Sukuna's technique will get weaker. It's then when the narrator specifies that Kusakabe can add a fully automatic system which makes him able to attack whatever enters his domain, with Sukuna even praising Kusakabe, saying that his reflexes aren't that bad. Okay, so some really cool stuff that we're seeing here from Kusakabe. Basically what he's doing with this simple domain reminds me a lot of what the big three families can do with their anti-domain technique, Falling Blossom Emotion. If you guys remember, this basically acted as a shield around the user that acted against a domain's guaranteed sure hit. By attacking it the instant the sure hit effect was activated. We then learn that Kusakabe has been dealing with Sukuna's slashes by reading his sparks of cursed energy, using his different motions, and simply using pure intuition. And thanks to his simple domain, doing all of this eases his work in being able to do this. So yeah, as we kind of mentioned before, I think Kusakabe is looked up to so much by the other sorcerers because he really has the ability to make the most with what he's given. And I think that's something that's really admirable about him. But just as the Kusakabe hype train began rolling, Sukuna sends out slashes that he barely dodges. It's then when he realizes that Sukuna activated his curse technique with literally zero motion. Alright, so this just reinforces that Sukuna is simply the goat of Jujutsu and can practically do anything at this point. But this is also really interesting to me since Sukuna practically optimized his body for Jujutsu by having 2 mouths and 4 arms. So being able to unleash his curse technique with no motion seems kind of like it defeats the purpose of having this highly altered body. Perhaps it's the case that Sukuna is evolving and learning new applications of his own Jujutsu as the fight progresses, which honestly wouldn't surprise me at this point. But as Kusakabe is on the ropes, we get another interview type flashback where everyone is praising Kusakabe's skill. Nanami calls him an expert swordsman with a wide variety of techniques. Meme states that Kusakabe is a useful man who can apply himself to any given situation. And Gojo praises Kusakabe for having the simple domain trump card, stating that normally beginners need to perform a binding vow just to perform it. But not only can Kusakabe form a domain without one, its range is absolutely massive. And with that, we learn that the binding vow for Miwa's domain is both of her feet need to be grounded or else it deactivates. So this piece of information is really interesting because we've seen many characters perform a simple domain in the past, but it's supposedly a much more difficult technique to learn and master than many of us originally anticipated. Plus, it's nice to see some homage to our favorite girl, Miwa, RIP to the most OP character in the series. But now jumping back into the fight, Kusakabe senses that Sukuna is about to expand the target of his curse technique to use the world-cutting slash and immediately expands the range of his simple domain. And even Sukuna is surprised by him just doing this. So this is pretty sick because it shows us that although Kusakabe knows that he generally can't take on special grade cursed spirits, he isn't afraid to back down from a challenge when his back is against the wall. And what Kusakabe is attempting to do here is allow Sukuna to enter his domain first before he's able to get off the world-cutting slash. We then cut to a panel of Mei where she says that the new shadow style sword drawing technique is used to draw your opponent into a range where you can counter-attack them. Kusakabe is different because instead of the opponent coming to him, he expands his domain to meet them instead. She then states that an individual capable of achieving grade 1 sorcery with no curse technique and also with their spine is someone who is not to be taken lightly. Alright, so this is super badass because we're learning a lot about Kusakabe here, and his skill set really shows us that although his demeanor paints him as someone who's scared a lot of the time, he's not afraid to take it to his opponents when the chips are down. We then cut to the panel where Kusakabe is attacking Sukuna with a barrage of slashes instantaneously. So yeah, basically for anyone who's not proficient in reverse curse technique, I could totally see Kusakabe's simple domain being something that could wipe them out in an instant. In fact, in the next panel we get some dialogue from Nanami where he says that he doesn't know of a single person that could evade that, referring to Kusakabe's slashes of course, but then hilariously comments that there's one who wouldn't even need to dodge at all, referring to Satoru Gojo of course. After this barrage of slashes, Kusakabe's sword breaks, but instead of simply giving up, this legend takes off his coat and starts throwing hands with Sukuna instead. He may be out of a sword, but this man is not out of options. Alright, no matter how he was depicted before in this confrontation with Sukuna in Shibuya, Kusakabe is really redeeming himself here and is super entertaining to read. Kusakabe even states that this isn't like me, and the fact that he's trying so hard surprises him. We then learn why this is when we get a flashback to Kusakabe talking to Principal Yaga. We learn that he's indebted to Yaga, and that's why he fights so hard for Jujutsu Society. So if you guys remember, Principal Yaga essentially made a cursed corpse of his nephew so that his sister would be able to live a happier life and essentially have the will to live. And this is a super small scene that I actually had to look back on, and this happens right around the time Shibuya ends. But now jumping back to Meimei, Nanami, and Gojo, they all agree that the biggest reason they believe in Kusakabe's strength is because he's simply a nice guy. So yeah, I believe this summarizes the character of Kusakabe beautifully. He may be animated, a scaredy cat at times, but he's not afraid to stand up for those he cares for and fight with everything he's got when the time calls for it. We then cut back to Kusakabe in a super cool pose talking about how he should get out of his own head, and if Sukuna survives, he'll kill Miwa and all the remaining players. All the other kids fought with their lives on the line, but what kind of adult would he be if he didn't charge towards death like everyone before him? And with that, Kusakabe activates new shadow style Moonlight Veil, where we see his broken katana get extended with his cursed energy. So this is really cool because we've seen this before in the series where Maki's father actually did a very similar thing using his fire curse technique. And it's a testament to Kusakabe's cursed energy control that he's able to do this as well. But as he goes to stab Sukuna, the King of Curses stops the katana with his finger, stating that he knew he would be aiming for his damaged heart and the attack couldn't be more predictable. The next panel we get is a heavily injured or nearly dead Kusakabe laying on the ground with a huge axe slashed into his torso. We then see Wee Wee running up on him in order to take him away from the battlefield and supposedly get healed. However, Sukuna has started to catch on to what Wee Wee has been doing and instantly appears behind him, calling him a nuisance. But as he's about to slash and kill Wee Wee, we see him get zipped away by an unknown figure. That's when Sukuna looks up and sees Miguel with Wee Wee standing on top of a building. The King of Curses states that there's now a new face that he hasn't seen before, to which Miguel replies that he must not know who he is, stating that he doesn't get out much, and that you Japanese really ought to expand your horizons. Alright, so this is absolutely mind-blowing, and Miguel is probably the last person that I'd expect to see here, but I'm really interested to see how he'll do against Sukuna. We know that in JJK 0, he was actually able to tank multiple hits from Gojo himself, and knowing how strong his hits are, that's not a feat that can be simply shrugged off. Needless to say, I'm super hyped for the next chapter of JJK and where this fight will ultimately go. But let me know your thoughts on what you think may actually happen. If you like this, be sure to check out my video analyzing everything about Hakari's domain expansion. Lastly, thank you so much to the members of my channel. You guys are absolutely fantastic and your support is really appreciated. Have a great day and I'll see you all in the next one. Stay curious, anime fam. Peace.